What's up, everyone? Welcome to Drumeo Edge. I'm here with Mike McCalco.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
What's up, everyone? Oh, I'm getting Drumeo Inception here. So anyway, today guys, the lesson's called A Beginner's Test. And I mentioned this in the forums, what it is. I get emails all the time, and I'm sure you get your students asking you too, even Drumeo members emailing you and messaging you, asking, hey, I don't know what skill level I'm at. I don't even know if I'm a beginner. And, you know, it's funny because beginner is where you start, right?
Of course.
But there are some things that you should know as a beginner before you move on to intermediate. So for all you guys who have always wondered if you're a beginner, or if you are a beginner, maybe you don't know how good of a beginner you are, because that's a pretty big scale of before you hit the intermediate, whatever that looks like, because there's, you know, it's objective at this point.
Sure.
But there's a lot of things that beginner drummers need to know how to play before they can kind of move on to the intermediate lessons on Drumeo. And this is a lesson for that. Now, you notice the sheet music. You can download the PDF and check it out. This is not going to be everything we talk about. We're going to talk about how these beats are played. We're going to talk about if you can read the notation. And if you can, great. Now you know you can move on and you can kind of branch out into other lessons that kind of build off of these. And if you can't, even better, because then we could give you some advice on where to go and practice these kind of grooves and all that. And Mike, you've been teaching for how many years now? 30 years almost?
20, let's call it 24.
24? Okay. So
I mean, there was years that I took off for performances and stuff. Yeah.
And you mainly work with beginner drummers?
Well, mainly, yeah. I mean, it's fun because you're starting from absolute scratch and they don't know what to do. You're absolutely starting from the absolute beginning. And the thing that I should mention, too, is beginner is sort of a term that some people might agree with me, but my boys, for example, are just like their dad, where they don't want to be beginners at anything. They're both taking martial arts, and neither of them want to be white belts. They want to be yellow belts.
Yeah.
In that case, there's a test. You know, you go a certain amount of weeks, and then there's testing, and you have to pass. With drumming, it's interesting because it's not so much like how many lessons you go to. To me, it's like how much knowledge you can absorb and how much stuff you can present on the instrument. I mean, what we did today was kind of like, you know, I think that a beginner should have these basic structures. So we're talking about quarter note ideas, eighth notes, sixteenths, and some pretty cool basic fills, and then 6 rudiments. To me, that's a beginner should have that under their belt. And I'm going to take this to a lot of my beginners today when I teach at my studio, and I'm going to say, okay, you tell me you're an intermediate or you're a low advanced, whatever, play all that.
Totally.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Go. Play, and I'm going to say play number 6. I'll start with number 6, and I'll say play number 9. And if they can, then like, cool. That proves to me that you're past that level. Now you're into low intermediate, getting up there. But there's really no grading system. That's the thing. I've had some parents ask me that. You know,
it's really tough. And then you also, it's not about can you play it. It's how does it sound. Can you play it with a good feel?
Absolutely.
You know, with all these things, you could play it, but can you play it in time?
Yeah.
So like grading a drummer is the hardest thing. And then you get a jazz guy that comes in who can't play rock too well, but he can kill it on jazz.
Yeah.
Or same with Latin, or you know. So it's really tough to kind of gauge, and we struggle with that all the time as instructors. So hopefully this lesson is just one of many that we'll do in this kind of genre or style, and give you guys something to kind of grade yourself with.
Right.
And throughout this lesson, let us know if you have questions. A lot of people here for it, which is great.
Excellent.
So let us know if you have questions, and if you're watching this in the archive, leave a comment below. And if any of this stuff is too hard for you and say, hey, but I'm a beginner. If I can't do this, then what does that make me? Doesn't mean anything. It just means you're working your way towards these goals.
Absolutely.
And if you are just starting out, if you just picked up your sticks a couple of weeks ago, that's totally cool. This is something to shoot for. You know, and we have all the lessons inside of Drumeo to get you to this stage. In fact, Mike, you have an amazing series called Your First Lesson, Your Second Lesson, all the way up to your 5th lesson. And a lot of that stuff is covered in here. One last thing I'll mention is in the forums, I have a forum post called New to Drums or New to Drumeo, Start Here. And it's a forum post that isolates all the greatest beginner lessons and an order in which you should do them at, and your courses are in there as well as that series. So we have a lot of resources for you beginners, and our goal here is to try and give you guys some sort of direction on where you guys can go and give you a standard of what do you think a beginner drummer should be at.
Absolutely. You know, I mean, once again, this is like the standard. I mean, we play songs and stuff like that too. But like you said, beginner, it's how long is that term? We don't know.
Yeah.
You know, if someone doesn't practice, you're going to stay a beginner for a very long time. I've got quite a few new adult students right now who've been playing for 30 years, which is longer than me, and I'm coming up on 30 years. But they can't read.
Yeah.
And then we go back to syncopation, and they go, oh man, I feel like a beginner again. Well, yeah, because you can't do this. So if you can't do something, you're beginning to start it over, or you're back at the beginning. Once you accomplish that, you're now adding that clay to the sculpture, and that's going to mold you as a player. So don't get too worried about, oh no, it's a beginner. I mean, you got to go back to the basics. And like Dave says, we're going to take some of these ideas and expand on them with accents and different dynamics and how to make them feel better. Because anybody can play number one. That's the first lesson that I teach everybody on the first lesson. They come with me regardless of age, whether they have a drum set or not. You're going to learn how to hold the sticks, and then you're going to learn how to play that beat, right? And I'm pretty sure here everybody can play that beat. Even for people who have never played drums before, that maybe have taken 1 or 2 lessons, and you go, oh, I've never really played it, but you look at that, that's 4 quarter notes. You should be able to play that, right? If you can't play that, go back to the basic lessons on quarter note structure, quarter note courses, because this is just counting to 4. And I say to my students, can you count to 4? And they say, yes. I said, you can play drums.
There you go.
If you can count to 2, even better, because you count to 2 twice.
Yeah.
It's simple math, right? So we all know how to play that one. Do you want me to demonstrate these, Dave, or what's the plan?
So I'll put it up here. And the first thing is, obviously, I guess we should even start with this. Can you read this?
Yeah.
And as a beginner, here's a question for you, Mike. Do you think beginners should or need to learn how to read notation?
It helps. I mean, I'm a reader, so it's kind of like saying someone who speaks 9 languages, is it good to speak 9 languages? Well, I can communicate. I can communicate better with musicians who read, or if I'm given a chart or music to play in a show, then yeah, it would totally help. Don't dismiss it. Some people go, oh, I don't want to read. Well, you don't have to. You definitely don't have to. If you can understand the structure of how notes are placed on a piece of paper, that's great. It's one thing to read a 1-measure pattern. It's another thing to read a snare etude or something like that with 16 different rudiments in it. Totally. That's a whole different game, right? Or interpreting a big band chart. That's another whole different game. I think Kyle's done some lessons on that kind of stuff, and maybe Daniel's done some lessons in Daniel class. Go and look at that and find out what's your vibe. Because for me, this seemed easy because I was really good at math. I don't know why. I hated math, but I was really good at it. And I just looked and went, well, okay, 4, and then 4 times 2 is 8, and 8 times 2 is 16. I was like, this is simple math, man. What's going on? This is all, music is math.
Yeah.
And then when it got to the point where I had to make equations out of that math with harder snare solos and interpreting charts, the math got hard.
Yeah.
But then I went, okay, well, it doesn't matter. I've come this far. I can see the finish line way in the distance, and I never get to that finish line. I keep staying in the distance, which is okay.
Yeah.
It just helps you to become a better player. And people go, man, how do you get those gigs? Well, I read, so I'm one of the few guys that can do those gigs. There's probably a handful of people. A million drummers and maybe 1,000 great readers.
Yeah.
It's a small percentage.
Yeah.
It
definitely is changing with the new era, I think, of drummers. I think notation is becoming a lot more prominent in drumming.
Sure.
Because I remember when I started, I didn't read for a long time.
Yeah.
But for example, for this beat right here, so let's just start with what everything means on the page. Do you guys know what the X means? Do you know what the middle black dot is and the bottom dot? That's the first question for you guys.
Black dot. I like that.
What else would you call
Reminds
it?
me of a drum head.
A black oval or
sort of, yeah, weird looking oval. So yeah, the X's at the top are your hi-hat. I mean, there's a notation.
There is a notation.
Do you know the number of it?
It's not a number. It's in the resources section. You can download the notation key in the tools and resources section.
And so that's the hi-hat. But you need to understand like the key or the legend of what you're playing. That's the first thing you do. Is you got to study the key. So with any of my books, whether it's the drumming system, Total Rock Drummer, whatever, when students buy the book, I say, okay, you got to study this key because it's kind of like the alphabet of where the notation lies. We're not even talking about counting yet. So if those X's are on the top of the staff, you need to know that's a hi-hat. There's been times where we've done lessons here with Dave, and I see something like a circled diamond, and I just email him and say, hey, what is that? He goes, oh, it's like a 12-inch china or something. I'm like, oh, okay. That's rare when it gets to the rare stuff. But the common stuff, it's just like reading any other foreign language, like maybe like Japanese or something like that, right? So this is learning how to read a language. The very bottom circle, or as you call it, black dot on the bottom space is your bass drum. I always thought of it as the lower the drum, the lower the note, the lower the pitch. Right, and it's also way down there. So I just remember that low one down there was my bass drum, and then the one that's on the second space from the top was your snare. Okay, and that's very, very standard. When you see that, that's and what I do students with this one is I have them play 4 hi-hats. So that I just go 1, 2. I write out 4 X's, and they go 1, 2, 3, 4, and then I'll say, okay, now let's just do bass, snare, 1, 2, 3, And sometimes they can put that together and sometimes they cannot. But what I say is let's go bass and hat, snare and hat. And I'm talking 7-year-old kids, you know, that are like, you know, and I got to get them to focus to go 1, 2. And that's all they need to do because that's the beat. The second half's the same thing. You're just repeating, you know? So you're going 1, 2, and if you just want to count in 2, 1, 2. The idea is I don't get my beginners worried about counting and all that stuff. It's about hearing the beat. So if I have them go 1, 2, 1, 2, that's good enough. Because then eventually I say, now we're going to translate that to 4, which is more common, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. You know, and you look at that and you go, okay, I got bass and hat, snare and hat. Bass and hat, snare and hat. Snare, bass, snare, right? 1, 2. And the tendency with all of my students, adults or kids, is like, this is what I see. It's like, well, where did that just go? I mean, so in my opinion, that beat shouldn't be overlooked, okay? Because it comes back to haunt you. When you have to play like beats like, because in a beat like that, my hands are playing the exact same thing as number 1, but my bass drum's changing around. So if you don't focus on going, you know, try to own that beat. Make it solid. It's called the classic 2-beat, or it can be just a quarter note beat, you know, or your real basic drum beat. But make sure you can play that comfortably and through a whole song.
And with a metronome. That's
absolutely.
That's the nice thing. With all these grooves that we're going to show you, it's not enough to just be able to play them. You got to play them in time. And I think that's a big thing that a lot of drummers miss out on is getting the time behind it.
Yes.
I think it's the most important part as a drummer, obviously. So make sure that with all these things, you guys can play them in time. So the number 1's pretty simple. Like you say, that's the first beat people play.
Yeah. I taught my mom that when she was 80.
There you go.
It's awesome.
Really?
That was great.
There you go.
Because she's been around drums since I was a kid.
Why not know how to play at least one beat?
And I said, Mom, I'm going to teach you a beat. And she goes, oh, don't be silly. And I said, come on, sit down. And then she played it. I mean, she was musical. She used to play a bit of piano and stuff, right? But yeah, at 80 years old, I had her playing that beat. So I don't know if she can pull it off today, but maybe. Anyways, let's move on. Number 2. So you have to know this guy. Okay, this is the money beat. You've heard the money beat. Rich Redmond refers to it all the time as the money beat. That's a term that we've heard forever. We're now dealing with 8th notes. Okay, so you need to understand 8th notes because 8th notes are going to own your world in the beginner section. Okay, quarter notes I tell students we come back to because we start adding 8th notes in the bass drum, but there's independence required. So maybe when we do the intermediate test, maybe we'll have some quarter note beats with some 8th notes, often with 8th notes, which are a little bit more challenging because there's independence. Now with the 8th note money beat, I mean we now have 8 X's, which is 8 hi-hats. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. You're not going to count to 8. So we're going to divide 4 into 2 parts. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Fairly simple. Very simple. I find that 99% of my students can do that when sitting beside me on another kit. I said, now the bass drum and the snare are exactly what we just did. It was 1, 2, 3, 4. Bass, snare, bass, snare. Okay. Now some members out there might be going, wow, this is real simple. Yeah, but this is a good way to break it down if some of you are teaching, teach it to your students this way because they'll get it. You know, don't just throw a piece of music in front of somebody and say, here, play that, because they won't be able to do that. Make them understand it so when they go home or when the student, you guys, go home, you know what exactly you're doing, because then you own that and you go, okay, that's easy. And then when it becomes easy, that gets you through this beginner journey, right? Totally. So all this one is now is I'm going to play the bass on 1 and 3, the snare on 2 and 4, and hi-hat's playing all the 8th notes. 8th notes are counted 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. Don't ever forget that, okay? Don't say, what is it, lemon, or the fruit count, or whatever it is. People ask me about the fruit count, and I'm like,
blueberry, strawberry.
Blueberry is 3, watermelon is 4. I'm like, oh, don't do that, please don't do that. That's great for the Orff classes and for kindergarten and all that stuff, but I'm teaching my boys how to count music. So when they get into music class, they're going to go, isn't that 8 notes? Isn't that 1 and 2 and, teacher?
All I see is a bunch of watermelons.
I see a bunch of watermelons over the floor. Yeah, or whatever. It's lemon. So don't do that. So 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and. Now, usually when I see students play that, they're chopping wood. That's okay. For now, we may need that sound at some point, right? But I would say practice that with the tips, you know, so you get a softer sound. Practice it with the shoulder or the shank of the stick, right? And then this is something we would do later. I get my intermediate students to come back and do like a shoulder tip thing. So there's a different pulse happening, or tip shoulder, which throws everybody off.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, because first off, again, make sure you can play this with correct time. Put your metronome on, fast and slow tempos. But what Mike said there is what I wanted to pull out is, how does it sound? Are you only playing it with the shank? And when you can only play it with one method, that usually tells you that you are thinking about it so much that you can't really free up any space in your head to adjust your sound on your hats.
Yeah.
So as a beginner, you want to be able to do at least 2, like you were saying, with your tip, and then also with a bit of the edge of the stick.
Yeah.
And then eventually you'll want to get that shank tip kind of motion there.
You know, and consistency is key. I've got this 10-year-old student right now that the music stand that I have in my studio is here, and he's staring at it, and he's like, he's missing the hat. It's kind of funny to watch. And then I'm like, I go over and I close the book, and he's like, oh, what are you doing? I said, you know how to play the beat. I said, don't look at it. Yeah. I said, you're like destroying my hi-hat clutch here. I said, just try to hit it right here. And I'll just take my fingerprint and I'll just do that. Like I'll make a little circle in the dust, and I'll say, stay in there. Yeah. And I don't care if you use the tip or whatever, because I mean it's hilarious.
So
like if
accuracy and consistency.
Oh, totally. That's another thing that's going to help for consistency and sound, right?
Well, you see a lot of drummers that move on before they should. You know, it's not so much, like I said already, it's not so much just to know how to play the beat. It's making it sound good, making it groove, playing it in time, and you said consistency. It's very important.
Absolutely. So things like that, go back to those beats and make them sound better. You know, I mean, there was guys at VIP that said, how come we can't make our money beats sound like you, Dave, and Jared?
Yeah.
You know, and I said, because we focus on them, we try to make them a little more dynamic, a little more musical, as opposed to just, I got it. I mean, there's the I got it, then there's the, I got it.
Yeah, I own it.
You know, so there's that attitude you got to put behind it, right? Should we move on?
Move on.
Number three killed me. Yeah. No, I had to put number 3 in there, because number 3 stuck me for a long time. I would say this was probably week 5 or 6 of drum lessons for me. I could play the money beat. I could play the We Will Rock You style money beat. Then this one showed up, and I cursed it. It was crazy, and I never cursed when I was young. So I learned how to curse because of this beat.
There you go.
And I think I made up curses at that time. No. So this one here was interesting because I knew I could play, this is not the beat, but I knew I could play this one. Which was kind of the We Will Rock You vibe, okay? And this one was the same amount of bass drums, but the last 2 bass drums were moved over closer to the snare. And I'll play for you, and then I'll show you what happened to me, and I'll show you what happens to 100% of my students, okay? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... Okay, so that's how it should sound. The bass drum's on the 1 and, the snare's on the 2, the bass drum's on the and 3. So you got this 1 and 2 and 3. There's a pause between that last bass drum until you hit the snare. Yeah. So when I don't hear that pause, this is what happened to me, and this is what happens to everybody else. And I don't teach people this, it's just what happens. Here's what happens. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... You've heard that?
I've heard that.
And it's like that snare drum just wants to come in after those last 2 bass drums, but you can't let that happen. So this is where counting is key. So, and I'm talking adult students, I'm talking 7-year-olds, I'm talking, you know, grandmas and grandpas. I say, okay, we need to count now. The other ones, fell into place. It was like the Lego blocks that just seemed to, this seems obvious. Now there's a piece of Lego, they're going, oh, we got to get the manual. This is weird. So getting the manual means you got to count, okay? And you got to count your face off, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. So what I get them doing is emphasize that and of 3. 1 and 2 and 3 and, because that's where you're not going to play anything except for the hi-hat. Don't play the snare there. And so we try that on their Lego. 1 and 2 and 3 and of course the snare follows. Don't let the snare follow, right? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and then they kind of get through that awkwardness. I got through that awkwardness and it was like, okay, so I'd be going, I'll play it real light. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. And the neat thing about that one is you start to hear that flow. You hear that repetition. You know it's not so nicely gridded like side to side like the We Will Rock You beat or the Money beat, but you hear that do do da do 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 da do do. So this one was a stumper for me, and it may be for a lot of the members out there as well.
Yeah, no, it's good. It's eight notes a bass drum, so you're playing more than just the Money beat. You're adding extra complexity there. And again, focus on timing. Yep. Focus on a couple different tempos, consistency, and making sure it sounds good. And then maybe add some inflections with your hi-hat. And again, this is beginners. Yep. Don't move on until you can really kind of get that one cooking, because you'd be surprised how many times we use these beats. You know?
It's unbelievable.
It's unbelievable.
When I get sent new songs for songs that I'm doing with Extreme Radio or whatever, it's like, the beats aren't hard, it's the arrangements.
Yeah.
It's the arrangements, because I don't know when to stop, and there's a break, or there's a halftime section. And the beats are simple in the pop stuff we're doing, or the top 40 stuff. There's nothing super hard. The hardest song we're doing is Separate Ways by Journey.
Yeah.
But that's like 1981 or something. So
yeah.
Steve Smith doing his thing. But now we're playing Weekend.
Yep. Nothing wrong with that.
It's Billie Jean with a different singer. It's like okay. But so that's a good one. Make sure you guys work on that. But also with some of these basic beats, accent 2 and 4 with a rim shot. That would be a nice addition.
There you go. Yeah.
And consistency. Try to keep it consistent. So if you're going for that rim shot, make sure it's every time, not just once in a while. Okay,
right,
should we move on?
And this is where we're starting to get into the little bit harder section of beginner. Yep. The first 3, absolute beginner. You should be able to play those as an absolute beginner. But as you kind of move on, now we're getting to 16th notes. Here's the next one.
Yeah. So once I tackle the basics of quarter notes and the basic reading of quarter notes, and this is all beat oriented, beat and fill oriented today. So we're not even getting into any snare drum stuff. I then have to introduce 16ths, because once we've done all the 8th note variations, which could be, quite a few pages of, there's only so many variations you can do with an 8th note beat, and then even when you move the snare around. But then, okay, what's next? Well, as opposed to adding 16ths to the bass drum, we got to introduce 16ths to the instrument, right? So what I say now, and this is funny because I've had so many students go, oh, I don't like this beat's no good. And then when we started playing Tom Sawyer, they go, oh, I love this beat. So this is like the bare bones of, I call it the bare bones of Tom Sawyer. The fact that the hi-hat is now playing 16 notes. Okay, so these are 16th notes, recognize those. You got the 2 lines stemming 4 notes grouped together. Don't count to 16. First thing I get my students to look at this and I say, well, count to 16 as fast as you can. And they go, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. I'm like, hey, it wasn't bad. I can't do it that fast. And they go, I can do it faster. And they go, I thought you said you can't do it that fast. 1 eano, 2 eano, 3 eano, 4 eano. What? I said, let's talk music now. Okay, so the count is 1 E and a, the next group, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. It's a musical term. I don't know the history of where that came from. I like it. I'll keep it. Works for me. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. That's 16 hi-hat notes. I don't know if I can play it that fast with one hand. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. So we don't need to worry about playing it that fast. Now the reason that students don't like this one is because we usually play it pretty slow. And it sounds like a really draggy kind of a drum beat. So I say, here's what we're going to play. The bass drum is the same as number 1, and the bass and the snare, and the bass drum is the same as number 2 that we did. So no difference. Snares on 2 and 4, bass is on 1 and 3. Here it is, super slow. 1 E and a, 2 E and a, 3 E and a, 4 E and a. Now keep in mind, when you start that, you may not be able to play it that fast. A lot of my students go, I can't do it that fast. So then we go 1 and 2 and that's where things can get lost. That's, I think, what students don't like, because they go like this. They go. You know, because they're not counting. You got to count, and they're not feeling the structure just yet. So that's when I say play a basic 16th beat. That's what we would look for: a one-handed basic 16th beat. You got to know it. Okay. So anything you want to add to this?
The only thing I'll add is if you guys are struggling with the theory behind it, you can't understand what 16th notes look like. I have a course called Understanding Basic Theory Notation. Take it. Great for beginners. I don't go into a lot of detail with the advanced dotted notation or repeats or anything like that. I just talk about the main stuff. So if you guys are having troubles with all the theory that we're talking about here, counting, what a 16th note is and all that, check out my beginner course on Understanding Basic Theory Notation.
Did I do a course on 16th note beats?
You did a course on
Thank you.
You did a course on 16th notes.
Okay, there you go. So check, I mean,
8 notes,
cross-reference all that stuff, right?
8th note triplets and all that.
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. Number 5, 16th note. Again, I like this one. If you guys look at the sheet music on this one, you'll throw it up there for us, Taylor. I guess, how would you explain this? This is a two-handed beat.
And I know that right off the bat, okay? Because I love the way Finale does this, right? But most programs will do this. Finale is a music program we use to write this. Or the stuff I send to Dave from my computer at home. If you look at the second grouping, the snare and 3 hi-hats, notice there's a slight angle. Notice if you put a ruler on top of that, there'd be a bit of a wobble. So the second 4 notes and the last 4 notes have an angle going up. That doesn't mean play it faster. It doesn't mean play it louder. I've had people say, does that mean it's a crescendo? No. It just means your eyes need to know something different's happening here. The fact that I see that there's a snare and 3 hi-hats, that immediately tells me this is a two-handed 16th beat. Okay? And generally, two-handed 16th note beats are used for faster tempos. I mean, why take away a note when you don't have to? I mean, you can. On number 4, you can go back and play the beat without playing a hi-hat on 2 and 4, but then you're missing that hi-hat note. If you're after that vibe, then great. But if I was to play like Smoke in the Water or that kind of a beat, two-handed 16th note beat, I can't play my snare and my hi-hat at the same time. I've tried that stuff, and it's silly, and it doesn't groove properly, and it's too much work for the left hand. So what ends up happening is you end up playing something we'll talk about in a few minutes, which is a single stroke roll, right, left, right, left, right, left, right, left. We're just constantly playing alternating hands. So without the bass drums, what's happening now is your right hand's going to come down to the snare on 2 and 4. So starting on the hi-hat with the right hand, 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E and 3 and 4 E and 1 E and 2 E and 3 and 4 E and Okay, so you need to get that. That's the first thing that I teach my students. We don't even add the bass drum. I want, and they go, okay. And oddly enough, like a high percentage of them get it like that. They go, that's not too hard. Sometimes I see the snare drum coming down too soon, or the hi-hat going back up to the hi-hat too soon. But just slow that down. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and once you got that, then it's bass drum time. Okay, so all I put on the bass drum was the We Will Rock You bass drum. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and 1 E 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and Okay, and you want to learn these beats slow to make sure you can get them, because some students would say, well, why can't I just use one hand?
Yeah.
You can, but we want to go faster. 1 E and 2 E and 3 E and 4 E and You know, one hand.
I want to bring something up in the chat. Alex said, I have played with bands. I can keep time pretty well. I need to learn how to add more color to my grooves and struggle. But all these in the sheet music I can do, but I still consider myself a beginner. And I was just mentioning in the chat, too, it's not about just being able to play these grooves. It's how does it sound when you play them? Are you free to not be staring at sheet music? Can you make him sound consistent with every single hi-hat, snare, and bass drum note you play? Can you add in dynamics and stuff, right? This is where you want to look at yourself as a beginner and say, okay, should I be moving on, or should I practice more of my feel and my approach, and how it sounds? Right. Because like you said, how come my money beats don't sound like Jared, Mike's, and Dave's, or Rich Redmond's, or whatever? It's how they play it.
That's right.
All right, move on to the fill here. Flams.
Okay, so we need to know flams. This is part of the rudiments. So we're covering one of the rudiments. So when I see this notation, I go, oh, look, it's a flam. It's a little baby flam. I love it. And flams, for those who don't know, are a little tiny little grace note in front of your initial striking note. And the way to execute a proper flam is 2 different stick heights. You can choose right hand first or left hand first. I suggest doing both when you're working on snare or pad, but we'll just do right hand first. And notice my stick heights. They're 2 different stick heights. As they come down to the drum, the stick that has the head start wins. And this is what happens. If I do it this way. So the best way to practice your flams is left hand first, switch, right hand first, switch, left hand first. Okay, and so on. All we're doing with this one is we're just taking our flams around the drums. Now this one is a total beginner thing that I do with my students, and you'd be surprised at how messed up it gets after this drum. I talked about this in a lesson before, that these 2 drums never see the proper love, you know, because everything falls apart. Here's how it should sound. We're going to go 1, it's just 4 quarter notes, 1, 2, 3, 4, flam, 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 snare drum, small tom, mid tom, floor tom. Please don't do this. I see this way too much in my studio. I'm like, what just happened? You only got 1 hand there. It's almost like I give up. I've done 2. 2 more is just impossible. Oh, come on, guys. Yeah. You know, I was teaching a guy yesterday, Mr. Roboto by Styx.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Dude, you know that? This triplet thing. I'm like, that's all flams. I don't know who the guy is that played it, but I'm like, now that's insane, man. You can't give up on that. Blah, 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 blah. I'm like, that is so cool. Yeah, yeah. So anyway, this is just 4 flams. Knowing your flams, executing your flams, using your flams as a fill.
On different surfaces, too.
Absolutely, you know. And put them everywhere. You know, you can mess around with them. I mean, that's going to take you away from it. Well, that's a pretty basic fill. You know, there's so many things that we can do down the road. I can go... take away the bass drum, I've got number 6. You know, so lots of things you can do to make this even cooler. Let's move on.
Move on.
One of my favorite 8th note fills. Now this is good for reading. For those students out there who are going, okay, I think I know how to read. I didn't put a sticking in there because this is kind of for you guys to figure out. It's all part of the test. But what this is it's 2 snares, a small tom and a snare, a mid tom and a snare, and a floor tom and a snare. And the first thing you're thinking is, there's going to be crossovers and paradiddles and pataflaflas. No, it's a single stroke roll. It's a single stroke roll. It's real easy. I'm going to go right, left, tom, snare, floor, tom, snare.
Let's hear it.
Okay, so right off the bat, it's kind of cooler than just your typical going around the world set. And I show this one to the students. It's probably halfway down in one of my books, you know, in the fills. And they go home and they show their parents this. Because I say, here's what I want you to do. I want you to keep on going. So what happens is the left hand stays on the snare. Your right hand continues around the drum kit. So I'll start it slow, and this is what they go home and demonstrate to their parents. Now, most may not get it that fast. I mean, you can go faster, but if they get it pretty decently, parents are going, my money is being well spent on lessons. Because they're impressed. They're like, yeah, but it's a fun fill to play. I use that kind of stuff all the time, you know, different variations, different accents, but even just playing it as it is a pretty smoking fill. Okay?
So my suggestion for you for this one, guys, obviously that's a pretty simple basic fill, but can you play it in time, coming back in on the one,
absolutely,
and without going off the click? That's a beginner's staple. You should be able to play an 8-note fill. And we're going to talk about some play-alongs at the end that we're going to challenge you guys all with, too,
Perfect.
if you can play those. But try playing that beat with all of the beats, or fill, sorry, with all the beats on this page. Even the 16-note one, can you go from 16 notes to boof booch? Things like that. Always think about it in a musical context as well. Let's go on to number 8.
Okay, 8 is cool because this works on your reading. And this is the reason it's called a test is because not everybody passes 100%. You fail something, you want to find out why you failed, and you go back and you fix it. Okay, so if this is something that's really foreign to some of you guys and gals out there, go back and work on it. Okay, flam on the snare. Okay, boom, we just did that on beat 1. Going to the small tom, playing 2 and. I'm going to play right left, and then we have a rest. Oh, look at that! There's a rest on count 3, and then I'm going to play the next stack notes, which is floor tom and snare on the and of 3. And also on the 4.
I like it because it's in unison as well.
It's in unison. So now we're learning how to play hands together, which is really, really common. Because the only time we really do that is when we play the hi-hat and snare together, right? Generally, fills are a little bit more linear structured. So I wanted to kind of get this a little bit broken up a bit. So here's how this fill sounds, okay? The rhythm is going to be 1 and 2 and 3 and 4. Notice how I'm counting all those 8 notes? 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and... It can get cool. You know, all of a sudden it's like, hey, I always liked fills that had some space in them, right? But different ideas. The flams, you talk about this big time in your VIP courses. You know, adding the flam just adds so much bigness to it, right? Just
texture,
like, you know, just adding that texture is wonderful.
Yeah.
So that's a fun one.
Okay,
let's move on to 9.
Number 9.
9, we're filling up the entire measure with 16th notes, okay? So what's happening here is I didn't want to do this. Do we have it up on the screen?
Taylor's coming with it.
He's coming.
He's having his coffee.
He's putting his coffee down. There we go. That's good. Yeah. Anyways, so I didn't want to do this one because this one's too typical.
Yep.
Everybody knows how to do that one, at least people who have practiced the 16th note stuff. Let's mix it up a little bit. So I'm going to start with 4 snares, 4 small toms, 1 E and a, 2 E and a. Then I'm going back around the set, starting 2 snares, 2 small toms, 2 mid toms, 2 floor toms. It's a cool fill. Sounds pretty cool. Pretty neat fill.
Yep.
Once again, you know, and slow, fast, dynamic. Put a crescendo at the end of that, you know. Makes it cool, right? Things like that you can add, and then all of a sudden it's like, okay, this is cooler than it was the way it was written on paper. But I think beginners should be able to read that. And today's going to be a good test for, like I said, for the students of mine who consider themselves beginners. I'm just going to throw this at them. And whatever they can't play, we'll talk about. Okay, why can't you play it?
Yeah.
What do we need to revisit?
And we have tons of lessons on beginner fills, and these are just a couple of the many beginner fills that you can go from. But we have a 16th note one, we have an 8th note one, we have some flams with some rests in there, unison playing. We have a 16th note beat, 8th note beat, quarter note beat. These are all great beginner staples that you guys should know. Again, timing, how it sounds, consistency. Fills, are they coming back in on the one, or are you speeding up or slowing down? Again, you are just still a beginner here too, so don't stress if you can't do it, especially that last fill. You know, take your time, work on timing, work on your 16th notes. Let's do the last one, and then we'll talk about the rudiments.
Okay, so this one is interesting because we had to put one in there that's a little bit curious, but nothing new rhythmically because we're dealing with 8th notes and 16ths and quarters. So that's, the whole page has been, you know, dealing with this this topic. So we got the unison. We're going to go snare drum and floor tom on the 1 and. So that's simple. 1 and then 2 eanda is 2 small toms and 2 snare drums, okay? So let's just look at that first part. 1 and 2 eanda. Sounds like this. Okay. The second half is 3 and 4, but what I did here is I went floor tom, snare on the 3 and then I want to crash, that's the little crash, that X, with the snare. This is something a lot of drummers don't do. A lot of beginners either hit the crash with nothing, or when they learn about the bass drum, to give it more punch, they always want to add the bass drum. It's okay to hit the crash with the snare. Trust us, we wouldn't lie to you. Okay? So here's what happens on 3 and 4. Now, however you want to change the sticking, if you want to go 3 and crash with the left hand, don't matter. Whatever feels comfortable. Here's the whole thing. 1 and 2 eanda, 3 and 4. Now you might be going, ooh, this is getting a little bit high. This is, wait a second, I've only been playing drums like 2 months. This is crazy. But this is good, because learn that. And that's going to take your level up higher, because it's going to inspire you to learn more fills like that.
Play that into context with a beat. Say beat number 3.
Beat number 3. I'll do it slow. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and...
Cool. I like that one too, because it almost ends the fill on the 4 instead of on the 1 when most people are doing it. So again, it's a little bit of a challenge.
Yeah.
All right, so now let's go to rudiments. Rudiments is something that a lot of drummers ask me about. Which rudiments should I learn? I know I'm a drummer, so I should learn all 40, or I don't even want to touch rudiments. But as a beginner, Mike, what rudiments do you suggest people know?
The Big 6. I call them the Big 6. That's
Big
mine.
6.
I own it. The Big 6.
You own it.
I patented it. I've copywritten it. I've
trademarked it.
It's on Mount Rushmore. So, no. Wherever that is. It's somewhere in the States. Single stroke roll, double stroke roll, single paradiddle, flam, drag, and the multiple bounce roll.
Now,
okay?
I'm going to stop you there. Do you guys know those rudiments? Without looking at the notation, because we don't even have it on notation here, can you guys play those rudiments in time? Now, the multiple bounce roll one is probably the toughest out of all those. But if you don't know how to play them, I have a course on, I think, all those rudiments. Yes. I also have a rudiment burn for every single rudiment that there is.
Beautiful.
So you guys can go and look at the rudiment. Rudiment burns are great for all you beginners out there. I do a rudiment burn on every rudiment where I sit down on a pad and I just play them with you. So you can load up the video, you can practice along with the rudiment. I start very, very slow. I explain the rudiment and then I speed it up. I think you've done a couple of those too with me as well. So if you don't know these rudiments yet, we're not going to go over them and really teach them here because we have them everywhere on Drumeo.
Yep.
But these are just ones that you should know and you should be able to play and you should be able to practice them in time with a click track on your pad.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Now, Mike, as a beginner, what else do you think that's maybe not on this page that you see drummers maybe struggling with or that you think that they should be working on and focusing on?
Timing. Timing is a big one because you put a song on, like I usually try to get students playing real basic songs, like real basic songs, like We Will Rock You, Billie Jean, trying to find some simpler ones now. Anything that's got a straight ahead beat, which is going to help solidify timing or understanding that this needs to stay steady. Focus from wanting to shift gears or channel surf on the drums because they might learn an 8th note beat and then a 16th note beat, and all of a sudden they're like playing, oh, I'm going to go to this, and in the middle of it, and there's no real focus. So I think focus is a big one, timing is a big one, but stick heights, dynamics, watching things like that, because I think people are holding the sticks way too tight and they're denting their drum heads. I see a couple of dents here. Who was here? That to me is just holding the stick way too tight and hammering it down into the head. That's how you dent your drum heads. Technique is important. Learn it early so then you don't have to worry about it later on down the road. You don't want to be stuck in that rut like I was, because I never focused on technique when I first started playing. I focused on playing the drums. I was getting tired quick. I was damaging drum heads. I was breaking sticks, and then finally when I studied with some of the greats and learned how to hold the sticks properly, drum heads lasted, sticks lasted. I wouldn't get tired, and I was getting faster. So there was so many focuses, things like that. You got to have fun. That's the main thing. This can't be like, oh my gosh, it's so painstaking. You got to find a way to make it fun, right? But don't lose focus. If you're with a teacher or doing something on Drumeo, stay focused on that. Like, don't say, well, my friend at school who's been playing for 5 years is doing this Avenged Sevenfold song. Well, you're not there yet, you know?
Yeah. Everyone's on their own journey.
Yeah. You know?
I've got a couple more things to add here.
Yeah.
This is the last part of this test here, and this is the play-along section. I love how you talked about musicality and playing in time.
Absolutely.
Timing is massive. And how do you practice timing? Well, obviously practicing with the metronome, but the better way, in my opinion, is playing with music.
Absolutely.
You know, because then you're learning to obviously play in time, but you're learning to play and evaluate time through musical resources like a guitar player or a vocalist. You're being able to calculate time without just a click. So my challenge to you guys in this beginner's kind of test, can you play at least these 2 play-alongs? I'll even say 3 play-alongs on Drumeo, okay? 7 countries, quarter note heavy. In fact, if you go to Mike Michalko's quarter note course, the play along on there is 7 countries. And you played that only using quarter notes. And that's where you start.
Yeah, I remember that.
If you can play beat number 1 on here, you could play 7 countries.
Yep.
Second one, eighth note rock. Same idea, but now we're using 8th notes.
Yeah.
That is a very, very, very popular song on Drumeo because it's a great beginner song. It's in a decent tempo. You can play fills in there. And then the bridge is like a little double time part. So, I mean, that's a great challenge for you. As a beginner, I think drummers should be able to play that one. Last one is a Billie Jane, which is very similar to Billie Jean.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I couldn't make the reference there.
Couldn't make the reference. That's another one. 8th note, super simple. But those are 3 play-alongs that I think beginners should be able to play. And if you make mistakes, that's fine. But it's better to go in there, practice to it.
Yeah.
I have a great lesson. I believe it's lesson 899, and it's called How to Use Play-Alongs. And as a beginner, you might want to check that lesson out because it's not about playing exactly what the instructor played. I get a lot of beginners that say, hey, I saw Adam Smith playing 8th note rock, and I can't do what he's doing. You don't have to.
No.
You need to play time. You just make it your own. We do something every month called the Drumeo Collaborations, where everyone pitches in and plays their own version of a play-along that we all select. And it's really cool seeing everyone's different approach to it. Right. And some people are at a higher level, so they add some more fills and stuff. And some people are beginner, they're just keeping time, but it's great.
Yeah.
Those 3 play-alongs are for you beginners to see if you can do it. And if you can, awesome. We have a whole bunch of other play-alongs in there. If you just go into our play-along section and you filter out by beginner 1 level, beginner 2 level, like Florida Grapes is another good one. 1 bar fills, one that Mike Michalko did. If you really want to practice your fills. Again, these are great beginner standards. Remember that?
I'm trying to remember all these now.
1 bar
awesome.
fills. Yeah, we have over almost 200 or so play-alongs in there.
That's so cool.
But beyond our play-alongs, Mike, you mentioned a couple songs. Queen, We Will Rock You.
Well, you know, it's funny because the kids that, and I say kids because sometimes they're kids with a lot on their mind, and drumming is not really something they're grasping. And this is for any teachers out there too, is most of them can go bass, snare. I mean, there doesn't even a hi-hat in there. It's just trying to get them to line up a bass drum and a snare with a song, right? And, you know, and then, of course, see, Billie Jean is interesting because it's a straight-ahead 8th note rock beat, but it's actually pretty quick. You know, you're moving. That right hand's moving. And I use that because I got students come in saying, well, they want to learn this Eminem song, or they want to learn this song about whatever. And it's like, well, okay. And I say, well, we're not there yet, but let's work on that. And then what I might say is, okay, let's take beat number 2 and play it along to this Eminem song, even though that's not what's happening on the song, but at least they're understanding the concept of timing. But then play-alongs, as you took that away from me, that's good, because that's what I do as well. Yeah. Now there's no drummer to follow. It's you with a band. And I used to practice play-alongs with no click. You know, because the click was a nice safety net. But the click was like, whoa, wait a second. There's no click here. And then I go back and you play with the click. I was like, oh man, this is easy. Holy cow, that's great. Because you learn to sort of start feeling and internalizing time, right? Yeah. I think people get so bent out of shape about that stuff. Well, I don't want to practice with the metronome because it bothers me. I say, well, how about put on some music without a click? Because that's what's going to happen in the band room. Difference is the play-alongs have been recorded in time, right?
Yes.
In the band room, there could be tempo issues all over the place.
All the time, yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And you start internalizing time at an early level, which is beginner, then you're going to know when someone's off. You'll just know. It's just like someone's tugging on your shirt and you're like, stop it.
It's a,
you know?
yeah, you feel it.
You feel it, you know, and that's the thing that you won't understand that until that happens, right? But yeah, and you know, work on timing, but don't get so caught up in going, I got to practice with the metronome every day because this guy on the internet says that I have to do that 6 hours a day. That can be discouraging for some kids. You know, I'm trying to get adults to do that. Guys have been playing 20 years, but they're not even very good players. They just had a drum set and they've taken a handful of lessons, can play 3 songs poorly, and now they want to get their timing together. I put a metronome on and they're panicking.
Yeah. Well, it's true.
Well, don't. Just have fun, you know?
Everyone has weaknesses in different areas, and you want to find those weaknesses. For example, I have a lot of members that come to me and say, hey, I've been playing guitar all my life, and now I'm getting into drums. So their timing is unbelievable because they're musicians by trade from guitar or piano. So the timing is something they have to work on. But if you're absolute beginner at everything, then there's a lot of things you have to focus on. But this is obviously not the gold standard be-all, end-all. If you can play all this stuff, you might still consider yourself a beginner. That's totally fine. Yeah. But this is a great little starting point. And if you guys found anything in here that you couldn't play, we have given references on how to practice it, where to go to find out resources in order to better yourself at that. Try those play-alongs. We're going to be doing an intermediate test in the next week. If you guys are watching this, in the archives, it's probably already up. But I also want to dive into the Q&A section here in a bit too and really talk to the members. There's 83 people watching this right now, which is great.
Awesome.
So I want to talk with you guys a lot and ask me and Mike questions about where you're at and all that. But again, just to recap everything here, make sure you can do everything on this page with time. Yep. Make sure it sounds good, you're consistent with it. Make sure the fills you're playing in time. Make sure you know Mike Michalko's Big Six rudiments. And, and if you can, try those 3 play-alongs. 7 Countries, 8th Note Rock, and Billie Jane. All great beginner play-alongs for you. And if you guys are still not sure where to go, I have a forum post in the beginner or in the Drumeo Edge forum called New to Drumeo, New to Drum, Start Here. It's got a great list. And we just released a course a little while ago from Bruce Becker, one of the kings of technique, on how to hold your sticks. You cannot avoid that lesson. Even if you're an advanced drummer, go and watch that course on how to hold your sticks, and you will learn the exact way to hold your sticks in any kind of grip you want it to do. Anything to add, Matt?
Real quick, before we get to the questions, this is going to be good because I had a mother come up to me at the school that I teach at about 2 weeks ago, and she's curious because the school I teach at is full of classical instruments. So, of course, there's grading systems with Royal Conservatory and the Suzuki methods and all that stuff. And with drums, there's really not. Unless you're doing a percussion course, which I'm not teaching. I'm just doing drum set and hand percussion. And so she goes, well, how will I know when my son is going to be, not a beginner anymore? And it's funny, he's got learning disabilities, so it's very slow progress. He's been with me for about a year, and the progress is very slow. So once again, it depends on the person, right? And I said, well, tell you what. I said, and it was funny how this worked, the way the stars align sometimes. When you said, I want to do this beginner drumming test, because I was going to do something like this specifically for him. And then give it to his mom and say, well, here's what I would consider important for a beginner to know. And then the intermediate thing, I don't think he'll be able to really touch that for a while. But I think that's really crucial. Like, you go, this is good. If Dave and Mike say that I'm sort of progressing with my beginner level by doing this makes me feel better. It's like I say, in martial arts, you wait for your grading. There's a month that you wait, and you have to work, and you can memorize kata, and you can memorize the punches, and you can all that stuff, and how well you can do in your discipline. It's the same thing here. It's just there's no real grading system. I think it just depends on enjoy yourself. If people want to play with you, that's the thing, because I never wanted to be a 7th degree black belt in drumming. I didn't care about that. I did in karate, and I achieved that. But the difference is, I just wanted to be good enough so people would want to play with me.
Yeah, exactly. You want to be able to express yourself.
Yes.
And then the better you get, the more ways you can express yourself.
And the difference, you think about levels of, like I said, with martial arts, when you go to a tournament, the black belts aren't fighting the orange belts.
No.
But here, I can play with people who are just starting out. Doesn't matter. We're making music together. If I'm the core timekeeper, that's okay.
Well, with karate too, it's very quantifiable. Drumming is an art form, and it's not as quantifiable. It's really tough. But and someone in the chat, they believe it was Alex. No, it wasn't. It was K Drummer said, "Beginner or not, having fun is important."
Absolutely.
Couldn't agree more.
Yep.
At the end of the day, this is a fun instrument to play.
It's fantastic.
Making music is fun, and if you're not smiling, I do these video reviews on Student Focus, and every time I see a video where whoever the member is just loving it, having fun, that's all I care about. You're just having a good time.
Yeah.
Let's take a 20-second break, and we'll see you guys all back for the Q&A, where we're going to really discuss where you guys are at and challenge us too. If you guys think that we missed something, let us know.
Sure.
And we'll do another one of these too. 83 people online, which is great. We'll do maybe a beginner's test version 2 or something like that.
Yeah. Excellent. See you guys soon.
See you guys in a bit.